Uh, Thanks for talking with me. I mean, wow, what a cool career you have.
It has its moments, I'll say.
I, I mean, I think I'm the luckiest guy in the world playing music, 5 days a week on NPR and being the opening act for Terry Gross, which was a great show that you did with her.
Yeah, that was fun. I was telling people it's like, playing pickup basketball with Michael Jordan. It's like your game is going to go up dramatically when you've got a teammate who is that great at what they do. So.
Yeah, she is awesome. Okay, Peter Ames Carlin, let me start by asking you the question that's in the prologue of your book. How did it all get so great?
I think it was a bunch of different things coming together, and probably the most obvious was just the fact that Bruce was in his mid 20s, and getting better and better at what he did, as a performer and particularly as a songwriter and record maker. And I think he just began to realize that his music that he needed to clarify his vision and sort of distill his, sense of what he was trying, the stories he was trying to write, the songs he was trying to write, the sound he was trying to make, and just figured out how to do his job better in the same way that we all do as we grow into them.
Yeah.
And I think also, I mean, he was under pressure from the record company, from Columbia Records, to make music that sounded like it could possibly get on the radio. And he began working with John Landau, who became a co-producer on the album and really, really encouraged him to clarify his writing and to just, again, distill things to a purer essence than the earlier songs that he had written, which were super cool, but kind of shambolic and shaggy and had sections upon sections and meandered hither and yon.
Yeah. Talk a little bit about for listeners that are listening that aren't that familiar with Bruce's career. Talk about his first couple albums and what led him to create Born to Run.
Okay. He was signed to Columbia in mid 1972 when he was probably, I think when he was about 22, 23 years old. And so he was really young and really talented and really um, sort of really still just sort of discovering his own voice. And so his first album, Greetings from Asbury Park, New Jersey, came out in January of 73. And it was full of like a lot of really cool songs that are still a big part of his repertoire. Spirit in the Night, um, growing up, a lot of these cool songs that really stuck around. But there was a kind of uh, his work was at the time he was compared to Bob Dylan, sort of like one of this crop of new Bob Dylans in the early 70s. But he also one of the, but one of the things about him that was less evident on that album was what a great rock and roll band leader he was. And that he was a very, very hot lead guitar player. And he barely, I think there's one song on that album that actually has an electric guitar on it. And so he's sort of discovering his sense of who he is as a songwriter. You look at him on the back of the album, the photo of him, he just looks like, an urban folkie of the early 70s in his blue
Hmm.
shirt with his long curly hair and beard. The second album that came out just 8 months later, the, Wild, the Innocent, and the E Street Shuffle, was much more of a band album. And so he's taken on two keyboard players and he's got his, Clarence Clemens on sax and Gary Talent on bass and Vinny Lopez on drums, and he's really kind of leaning into the idea of a jam, kind of a jam band, really. And their
Hmm.
shows began to get a lot more elaborate just in terms of the complexity of the songs and the amount of soloing that was going on. Um, And that record has got a lot of, it's got Rosalita on it and Sandy, Fourth of July, Asbury Park. It's, again, a whole bunch of songs that are still a part of his repertoire, that are terrific songs. But it was, again, a very non-mainstream type record. The songs are very long and elaborate, and, there's a lot of really great stuff on there. But the problem was it didn't get on the radio at all. It was very difficult, I think, for radio programmers to understand exactly who he was and what he was trying to do and to hear any connection to stuff their listeners were going to want to hear. So these two records came out in 1973. They were critically acclaimed and sold a pittance, really, maybe 20,000 copies apiece, which in the early 70s was nothing. And and so he was essentially, though, I think he had a three record contract with Columbia, but when it was time to go back into the studio and think about making the third album, the executives at Columbia said, "Well, we're not sure we want to invest our money in that. So in a full album, so why don't you go and try to make a single? And if we hear a song that sounds like it could theoretically be on the radio, we'll give you the money, the rest of the money that you need to make a full album." And so, with that charge and with this sort of existential threat to him as in terms of who he wanted and needed to be, he had to figure himself out on the fly. And that was when he first started working on the song Born to Run. And he and his then manager and co-producer Mike Appel spent 6 months working on the single, on and off between tour legs, going into the studio and just, trying to come up with a sound that expressed what Bruce was trying to say in a way that was going to be accessible to radio listeners of 1974, 1975. But at the same time, really had the depth of feeling and expression that Bruce was after.
Yeah. Now, I want to do a hypothetical with you on something. Is what if those first two records would have sold 200,000 copies each?
That's a good question. It could have been that Bruce would have been allowed to just continue making records like that. His first vision of Born to Run was essentially an album that was going to follow on what he had established about his work and his band on the second album. And so some of the early versions of the songs that wound up on Born to Run, like the early version of Thunder Road is called Wings for Wheels. And it's
Mhm.
another one of those songs that just has verses upon verses and two different instrumental sections and more verses and bridges. And it just, it's like about a 7 minute version of the song. And the lyrics are the voice is nowhere near as disciplined and as focused as the voice on Thunder Road. There's a version of She's the One, which is similarly long with similar, of with similarly sort of shaggy lyrics and less of a tight construction. And so his original idea was that he was going to make an album that was full of these very band forward, jammy type of songs that were, stretched out a little more. But but then as he got that charge from his record company and began to think of himself and his songs in a slightly different way, then he began to tilt more toward the sound and the energy that we're familiar with on the released version of Born to Run.
Yeah. And he really did work at making it a perfect album.
Yeah, that was the idea. I mean, and it's sort of jaw-dropping to think of this guy who, at the time when they started working on this, was 24 years old, who essentially told his band members and his co-producers and everyone who would listen that he was going to make like the greatest rock and roll album ever made, which is
Yeah.
biting off a lot. It's like the proverbial, I'm going to write the great American novel, all these, that's like the first way we know you will not be capable of doing that is when when you say you're going to do it. But then Bruce set off and working, alongside Mike Appel, and then when John Landau came in, they really had this vision of an album that could be sort of take up the standard of the original generation of rock and rollers, Elvis Presley, Chuck Berry, Bo Diddley, take some of the sound and the feeling and the sort of kinetic energy of early rock and roll and combine it with the intellectual depth and vision of Bob Dylan.
Yeah. I was lucky enough to be at the Roxy for the first shows there. And my buddy Carl, who was my assistant manager at the Warehouse Record Store in Whittier, California, he was in the very front of the venue, so
Mhm.
we were able to hear the Detroit medley from the first show, and couldn't believe the how people looked when they walked out. Everybody was sweaty and out of breath, and I just thought, man, what's this guy doing to people? And
Yeah.
we were warned by the waitresses that he would be coming out on our table and hang under our drinks. And what a fantastic show! I mean, unbelievable.
Yeah, I got a chance. One of the unbelievable things I discovered when I was working on the biography, 12 years ago, or whatever it was, 13, 14, 15 years ago now. There it is. Bruce, was that they have this amazing archive of filmed shows from the 70s because a documentary filmmaker named Barry Rebo was had been following Bruce around really since about 1972, shooting film on him because Rebo came from the Jersey Shore and was a young, ambitious guy who wanted to be a filmmaker, while Bruce was a young, ambitious guy from the Jersey Shore who wanted to be a rock star. So he had this idea that, well, I'll just when I can, I'll go see Bruce, shoot a show or whatever it is that he's doing, and then eventually I'll make a documentary about this guy and his, quixotic attempt to become a rock star in the early 1970s. Like what nobody knew was that he was not only going to become a rock star, but he was going to become like the hugest American rock star. So they have among the archive of shows they have are two of the shows from the Bottom Line in New York in August
Mhm.
of 75, which was just like 2 or 3 months before you saw those shows at the Roxy. And they're astounding. I mean, that is really a moment of discovery for him in terms of the kind of performer he was going to grow into being. Earlier, he was a much more sort of static, he focused, the aesthetic, the rock and roll stage aesthetic of the late 60s and early 70s was very focused on the music and much less focused on the actual energy of the performance. Guitarists would, that was the era where guys would turn their backs to the crowd to play, because they were so serious about what they were doing, or just stare at their feet while they're trying to get everything just exactly right, or find the spirit of the moment or something. Whereas Bruce had never forgotten how exciting and Elvis Presley was when he saw him on TV in the late 50s on the Ed Sullivan Show, and always adored that kind of performance, that really exciting, energetic thing. I mean, he had a friend whose family owned a movie theater on in Red Bank on the Jersey Shore, and after the theater closed, they would watch these old rock and roll films, and one of them was the Tammy Show with that incredible James Brown performance.
Mhm.
And Bruce studied that like the Torah, I mean, he would just watch James Brown, and in the aisles of this empty theater in like 1970, 1971, he would try to start doing James Brown's moves and studied how he worked his band and kept them in line and signaled them. And so much of what you see about Bruce on stage, even now, 55 years later, is exactly, stuff that he learned by watching James Brown.
The
The way
Masters.
Yes, the way he directs the band, the way that he rides the music, the way that he animates, the songs as a front man. And so again, it was this blend of kinetic rock and roll energy and really thoughtful, deeply felt songwriting.
Right. So you wrote a full biography on Bruce back in 2012, and the idea for the new book, which is Tonight in Jungleland, out this month, this came to you like just a little over a year ago, the idea of writing this book. So you had to work fast to get it
Yeah.
done by the 50th anniversary, which is what's coming up on August 25th.
Yeah, I had sort of been scratching around trying to come up with something, something I wanted to write about in the second half of 2023 and first few months of 2024, and kind of sifted through some ideas and did a bunch of research and work, and nothing really stuck. And I always knew I had a big archive full of stuff left over from writing the Springsteen biography. And I thought, well, there must be something in there. And then I began to, I looked at the calendar, began to realize, like, oh, there's this 50th anniversary with Born to Run. So I wrote up a proposal and shipped it to my editor at Doubleday, and the response was, "Yeah, we'd love to do this, but you're just going to have to do it fast because because of the count, the publishing calendar, they really want you to turn in your book like a year before it's going to get published because it takes that much time to get it through the system and get the publicity machine rolling and really, make it happen." So essentially, the message was, "Yeah, we should do you should do this, but you just have to have it done in 6 months." And I thought, well, I've got this big archive of stuff, so I'm going to start ahead of the game. But then once I said sure, and we got rolling on the project, I looked into that archive, and it was like, oh my gosh, I have so much less Born to Run material than I thought I did. So I just had to work very, very fast and just travel and talk to people and start doing interviews and kind of writing and reporting at the same time. And so it
Kind
became
of ironic that you put yourself under such pressure when you're studying a an album that he was under so much pressure to put out too.
Yeah, that's what I would tell myself. That it was that there was some memetics taking place in terms of the process. That it became, the immersiveness of the work and the fact that it was essentially, certainly for the last 3 or 4 months, it was like I had no social life. I had no, all I was doing was working and working and working.
Sounds like Bruce once again.
Yeah, exactly. So it was kind of like, okay, well, if he could do it, I could do it. Though, of course, he was in his early 20s and I was in my early 60s. So it was a little, I didn't maybe have quite as much of that wild youthful energy, but I did my best.
Yeah. You're a really great writer. You really know how to turn a phrase. And have you written songs at all? Are you musical yourself?
Well, A, thank you, and B, I am musical, and I play guitar and keyboards and have since I was little. But I don't actually. It's always sort of surprising and yet true. I've never been drawn to songwriting. Like I may have been. There may have been moments when I have sort of fiddled around and tried, but for whatever reason, it just feels less. I feel less comfortable in that terrain than I do on on the written page. But I've like been in bands and uh I love playing music for people or just playing music for myself or whatever. But I don't know, I guess maybe because I take music and songs so seriously and I can tell that every time I've tried to write a song that they basically suck. And so it just seems like there's so many great songs in the world, like trying to
I know. So
it's like, why even try to, I don't see how it benefits society for me to write mediocre, at best mediocre ones.
I'm with you. I know exactly what you mean. Now, here's another hypothetical for you. And I wrote some of these down when I was reading the book. And
Okay.
okay, how would you have fared as a rock critic in the 1970s, the era of King Landau and Dean Robert Christgau? And what would you have nicknamed yourself?
Ha. I think I would have been, I don't know what I would have been. I mean, it was their work that introduced me to the possibilities of music criticism or rock and roll criticism. And, I mean, obviously, like Grill Marcus's Mystery Train is such a seminal work in terms of, the amount, the, the seriousness with which he he pursued, rock and roll songs, in a way, and wrote with a depth and an appreciation for history and culture, and made connections that no one else had made before, and wrote about it in this very, I mean, it's a beautiful book.
Hmm.
Um, and so that is kind of like, the headwaters in some ways of my writing to a degree, or the earliest inspirations of it, along with reading stuff in Rolling Stone and all the other 70s rock magazines that I started reading when I was like, a pre-adolescent. How I would have fared, who knows? I mean, I guess, I sort of ultimately, when I eventually began to do that type of work, I seemed to slip right in. So apparently I took to it fairly regularly. I don't know that maybe I would have called myself the jester. I have no idea. I'm less of a, I mean, it's interesting to me how seriously those guys took themselves in the 70s, and
Well, and
how,
how about how everyone else took them?
yeah,
I mean, I read the a review of Bob Dylan's self-portrait, and I thought, I don't need to hear this record. It
you're
must
right,
really,
exactly.
it must suck.
Yeah, well, well,
Real
I
Marcus
mean,
says it sucks, so it
yeah,
must suck.
well, it definitely took people by surprise. I mean, but Dylan was up to, I mean, he was so eager to, serially create and then destroy his own image again and again and again in all these different ways, and that was part of the process. But at the time, it struck them as a violation, like a political, a political crime of some sort. But yeah, but I miss that, I mean, on the one hand, you can say, oh, having these gatekeepers, especially since it was overwhelmingly white male, cisgender, heteronormative dudes, as in the early 70s, defining what was and what wasn't acceptable in the culture. You could say, oh, having these gatekeepers is too limiting and too wrong. But on the other hand, I do miss the era of expertise and sharp criticism.
Yeah. Are you friends with Sylvie Simmons?
I've met her. I think we did an event together. Is that possible? I can't remember where we were. I know we did something, because I definitely, oh golly, I can't remember. Anyway, I know who she, yes, we've
Yeah.
met.
Yeah. She's a good writer.
Yes, I know her work. She's quite good.
Yeah, I want to ask you something about a specific song, and that is Backstreets. Backstreets, I always thought that Terry was a guy.
Right.
And what's your opinion about that? I know you write about it in the book, but talk about it. Talk about Terry and Bruce.
Well, it's interesting because, in a way, I mean, I don't think there's anything on that album, on any of those songs, that Bruce did by accident. And the fact that Terry is a name that could as easily be a woman's name or a man's name, it makes you wonder, it leaves it a little unresolved. Like, is this just, you have those very, very close friendships when you're young, when you're an adolescent, and they feel like even if you're, even if they're not even remotely romantic, there's a kind of depth of connection that feels like family, or feels romantic in a sense, or has that intensity. On the other hand, it's very much a song about love and loss, and a kind of, it feels like a romantic love. I mean, he goes back to that name again in the song The Promise, where one of the people he sings about is Terry. Terry works in a rock and roll band. Is it Terry works in the rock and roll band looking for that $1 million sound? It's
Hmm.
obviously a name that he's drawn to. And maybe the fact that it is as, non-binary as it gets, in terms of names, is something that he's drawn to. I think, it was interesting to me after after the biography came out, and I had written in some depth about the songs on Greetings, and had talked to Bruce about them, that he said, and that he didn't say it to me, but he did say at some point after the biography came out, that the song The Angel, which is on the first album and is about like someone, dressed in motorcycle leathers, or seems to be very elaborately decorated, leathers of some sort, is actually a cross dresser, which now, we would think of as a trans person. So, Bruce has always been interested in people who are cast out from mainstream society. And I think he's always felt a connection to gay culture and to gay people because he understood, given the way that how poor his family was and how sort of eccentric some of them were and how they felt like that they had been cast out of society in Freehold, the little town where he grew up in. I think that he's always felt a connection to people who were, for whatever reason, not invited to be a part of mainstream culture.
Right. I was I saw Bruce and the E Street Band at Oakland where the Warriors played,
Hmm.
78, I think it was. And
Hmm.
I had really good seats and I sat next to his dad.
Oh, is
And
that right?
yeah, his dad had a little name tag on, and I start talking to him. My name is Doug, also, blah blah, and we make a little small talk. So, well, at intermission, he goes walking backstage and stops the door guy, and he points at me, and
Hmm.
the doormat's like, "Come on, get in here." So he wasn't going to hear it. I was under the impression that Bruce was or that Doug Springsteen was trying to get me backstage, but it didn't happen.
Well, he was a nice guy. I mean, a sweet guy in a lot of ways. I mean, they had a very complicated relationship, especially when Bruce was younger, because Doug was bipolar and but of course coming from the mid-century, mid-20th century blue collar town, it was neither diagnosed nor treated for the longest time. And so it was just very, he had a difficult time just getting through his days a lot of the time.
Yeah.
And so it was very, very difficult for him to connect to his son. And a lot of what he had to say to Bruce in terms of just trying to raise him and prepare him for adulthood felt to Bruce as an adolescent to be a very, diminishing and very punishing sort of attitude. And so Bruce came out of his adolescence feeling, at least in part, like his father had rejected him for being a substandard person, and that was something that was very, very wounding for him, and something that is still sort of part of, that primal experience is still very much a part of his psyche.
Yeah. I had no idea that they were struggled so much because when he would talk about his dad during shows, it was always like turn down that goddamn guitar. Like,
Hmm.
that's about as harsh as it got
Yeah.
that I saw in a show.
Yeah. Well, there were certain songs. I mean, when he began to do those long kind of spoken pieces in the middle of the songs or to set up the songs in the mid 70s, there were some songs that would come, about childhood or things that resonated, covers that came out of his childhood that like the Animals song,
It's my life.
"It's My Life," that had this very long and very, very dark um, vision of him, having a big screaming argument with his dad in the kitchen about what Bruce was wearing and what his clothes and his hair and what he was doing with his life. Because, Bruce's experience of it was that his dad just had contempt for him and his the life he had chosen for himself. But whereas for Doug, and I think Bruce came to understand this later, he was just trying to, in his way, to protect his son from being an outcast like he had been. He wanted him to be a very traditional person who would, be able to exist and thrive in mainstream society.
Hmm. So, Peter Ames Carlin, what are you going to work on next?
I'm not really sure yet. I mean, as we talked about, I pivoted very, very quickly from my previous book, which was the book about REM, to this Tonight in Jungleland, and didn't get a lot of time off, and then was immediately on deadline, and did, like I said, did nothing but work really for the second half of last year. So I've been kind of but I've been preparing for the publication of this book, which has become another immersive project. And so I'm not sure yet. I've got some ideas and I'm kicking some things around, but I'll probably know more in a few months.
Is there another Bruce book in the future, possibly 50th anniversary of Born in the USA, or
I don't, I haven't given it a lot of thought. I mean, who knows? If you had asked me, a year and a half ago if I was going to do a second Bruce book, I would have said no, or I don't, I wouldn't have known what it would have been. So, I would never say no. Obviously, I'm very drawn to Bruce and his story, but at this moment, I can't quite imagine it.
yeah. And you've written about some heavyweights, Paul
Yeah.
McCartney, Paul Simon. I mean, yeah. Is anybody else kind of on your bucket list of people that you'd like to write about or that you've thought about?
Well, there are a lot of people that I'd love to write about, but then, you sort of need to figure out the calculus of, who isn't, who has the sort of following that, and has had the impact that would sustain a full book length narrative. And, just in terms of the art that they've created and, what's interesting about their lives. Um, and what already exists. I mean, it's always interesting to me that there are certain artists who felt that I've encountered along the way who seem to have a lot of books written about them, but then when you get into it, you realize like, well, none of these are really the type of reported biography that I'd like to do. I mean, I was astounded when I started thinking about writing something about Bruce Springsteen in 2009 that when I looked into it, I had been a big fan of Dave Marsh's biographies that came out in the late 70s and mid
Hmm.
80s. But even those books, Dave had such great access to Bruce and his insiders that he didn't do a lot of original reporting about Bruce's life and where he grew up and his family and all that stuff because he had Bruce, and so when I started working on the biography, it was amazing to me that there were all these people that he had grown up with and been in bands with and had known him who no one had ever really spoken to. And when I began to talk to them, it was like, oh my God, this is like the lowest hanging fruit ever. And plus also it's Bruce Springsteen. I mean, this is like he's huge. How is it that this doesn't that there's, but lo and behold, there was an opening. So I I dove right in.
Yeah. So on August 25th, is Bruce, is he going to be in New Jersey and driving his car like he's done in the past?
That's a Bruce question. I don't know. I sort of assume, but you never know with that guy. I don't know that when he told me that story about him, about how every year when the anniversary comes around, he puts Born to Run on his car stereo and drives around the shore and remembers how it felt to be young and hungry and living and work and discovering himself there. Whether he actually does it on the specific anniversary or sometime around the end of August was unclear to me. But he may well be doing that. I don't know. I mean, it seems like a good time. I know he's going to be at the symposium at Monmouth University in early September because I'm going to be there too. And we're actually going to be on a panel together, which will be interesting. So, yeah, so that'll be good. So he'll definitely be in the neighborhood right around that time.
So is Born to Run your favorite Bruce album, or do you have another album that you lean on that you pull out more than others?
Well, the album that I came in on in terms of, under really getting Bruce and becoming a fan was Darkness on the Edge of Town, and
Hmm.
which was the next record. But I mean, the moment I bought that album and began to fall in love with it, I ran back to the record store and bought Born to Run. So that feels as that was as in some ways as much a part of my entry into his milieu as any other. I mean, in terms of my favorite, it just changes from day to day because he's had over the decades, he's made so many different records that and there's a real diversity there in terms of the sound and the songs and what he was trying to do. And so On any given day, Born to Run can very well be my favorite Bruce Springsteen album. And then
Hmm.
some other days, I mean, that album that came out, I think in 2019, Western Stars, is like, I love that record.
I
I
do
mean,
too.
yeah, it's a fantastic album. I mean, and it's so different, that kind of Western pop sound with the more elaborate sort of, musical constructions that sound like somewhere between Burt Bacharach and the Beach Boys. I mean,
Glenn
that
Campbell.
Glenn Campbell, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. It's that kind of uh, orchestrated Western pop, which you don't think of in terms of Bruce Springsteen. But when he got interested in making that album, I mean, he made this incredibly beautiful record that, in a weird way, feels to me like a follow-up to Darkness on the Edge of Town. It just
Yeah.
lives in that same terrain, and that's the southwestern deserts.
Now, how about this Tracks release that just came out? I mean, I was flabbergasted that he had seven complete albums done and not released. Was this a surprise to you, or did you know about these albums?
Well, I didn't know specifically about some of them. I knew that some of them existed, or I was aware that he had done significant recording on projects, that didn't see the light of day, or that eventually evolved into other things. But especially in the late 70s and 80s and 90s, I mean, he was just cranking songs out. I mean, the band talks about every time they came into the studio, he would have two or three new songs to work on. And it would be like, and that would happen day after day after day. And so they recorded a lot of stuff, and a lot of it, the majority of it never came out, or at least not in that form. So, um, it was a bit of a surprise. I didn't know that he had seven essentially completed albums sitting around.
Crazy.
Yeah, I mean, I
Yeah.
think the first one, the '80s one, is more, the ones he recorded in his home studio in LA. I mean, those sound a lot like demos to me as opposed to finished recordings. I mean, but his demos are really, really good. So, like, Tunnel of Love is an album that is essentially home recordings.
Yeah.
And it sounds fantastic. And so, and that was a fully released album in 1987. So, I wouldn't be surprised at this point. I wouldn't be surprised if tomorrow he put out seven more unfinished albums.
Peter Ames Carlin, I'm too cheap to get the pro version of Zoom, so my time is up, but I want to thank you for talking with me. And if you're down in this neck of the woods anytime, get a hold of me.
Will do. Thank you
Have
so
you
much.
have you on the radio with me?
I really enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Peter. Good
All
luck
right.
to
Take
you.
it easy. Bye-bye.
Congratulations, too.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.